Jagex has finally released all of their proposed bosses for 2025. This latest one might have taken me a whole week, but I have now yet again beaten every boss in old school RuneScape, which means that I am now currently qualified to tell you which one is the hardest. Again. In this video, I'm going to be going over Jagex's official old school RuneScape bossing ladder. But really though, what even is a bossing ladder? The idea of a bossing ladder stems from you completing easier content, which will then give you the skills that you need in order to climb to more difficult content. I'm going to exclude from this video Slayer superiors, skilling bosses, and any other weird technicalities you can think of, like quest bosses or anything like that. I'm not really a big fan of early, mid, and end game descriptors for a video, unless it's for the title of one of my videos. It is fantastic for driving engagement down the comment section. Just like the last video that I made on this topic, I want to break these into tiers. I think it's a better way to explain them, especially at the early game bosses. They're not really that much more difficult than each other, and I'm really not trying to go into a deep dive about how the Barrows brothers is technically harder than the Giant Mole or anything like that. They are though. Tier 1, the easy tier, the baby dick boss tier. Let's start off with RuneScape's easiest boss, the Gemstone Crab. This boss came from the brand new Varlamore update, and it's basically just a giant punching bag. All of his stats are 1, but somehow hardcore Ironmen are still finding a way to die here. Due to the crab's stats all being 1 and the crab not being able to die, this makes this boss an excellent place to train your combat skills, as you're always extremely accurate, and he only moves once every 10 minutes, making the boss extremely AFK. There's a small negative experience modifier here. You get 3.5 experience per damage instead of the normal 4 experience per damage. Due to the lack of downtime though, since you only are not hitting him once every 10 minutes, he actually outshines most of the other methods that people usually train at these earlier levels. There's really no loot to speak of here. Once every 10 minutes, the top damagers are able to mine the crab for like 1 to 3 gems or something, but there's no other loot here because the crab literally never dies. Barrows is an absolute classic. Every time I do a run here, it just hits me with such a massive wave of nostalgia. Way back in the day, my first memory here, I must have been in like 7th or 8th grade or something like that. Some dude died for like 10 mil here, and back then you could just scoop it up. That was a fortune. He came back like super upset about it. I gave him back his boots. I told him that was the only thing that I got. Somebody else scooped the rest of this up. He thought I was a super nice guy, and I went and bought a few Santa hats. Anyways, the Barrows brothers is part boss, part minigame. The idea of this is that you're breaking into the crypts, the eternal resting places of these 6 ancient warriors, and then defeating them for a chance of obtaining one of their armor pieces or weapons, or grave robbing. After defeating the bosses, you're going to go down into the crypt and loot their chest. This can be done pretty reliably once a player unlocks Protect from Melee at 43 prayer, and then is fairly easily completed at 55 magic with the Iban's Blast spell. Or realistically, even earlier with basic blast spells, you're going to want to bring range for Arams too, and this might be the part that newer players struggle with the most, since the others are really weak to magic and they're not a problem. Down in the caves on the way to the chest, there's some minor tanking you're going to have to do, but nothing a few sharks can't solve for you. Overall, this one is really easy to get going early on and is one of my favorite early game activities. The Giant Mole occupies a really weird space in RuneScape bossing. On one hand, all you need is 43 prayer for Protect from Melee and something to hit the boss with, but realistically, this boss just absolutely sucks to kill without the shield from at least Falador Heart in order to track him down, and either a full max mage setup like you see I have here, or a twisted bow. This boss is one of RuneScape's first, which means that back then it was basically meant to be fought in a mass of players, and the only mechanic that they had back then was to make the defense really high. So while this boss is one of the easiest in the game and was originally targeted to early game players, it is pretty much exclusively killed by endgame pet hunters with max gear, or e-girls who trick some guy into lending them their T-bow. Mechanic-wise, pretty simple. We already talked about it. You pray melee, you hit the boss. After 50%, he's able to dig to a different part of the cave. This is really annoying if you don't have Falador Heart unlocked, because the Falador Heart shield at least points you in the right direction of the boss, so you don't have to just run around looking for him. Overall, this is super chill boss as long as you have the levels and gear to make it, so I don't recommend doing it at an early level, even though it's early on in this video. Next, let's talk about our 2 free-to-play bosses. Obor recently got an overhaul to how he functions. Before, you had to consume giant keys in order to kill him, but now you can kind of just go in there and start swinging. As long as you have 1 key, it just doesn't consume it anymore. But to compensate for this, the loot is complete dog shit now, so you wouldn't really want to do it anyways without the keys. The keys themselves that I keep on mentioning unlock a chest in here which contains the loot that you normally would have gotten from just killing the boss. The big draw is the Giant's Club, which is now sitting right above 1 million GP. The boss himself was made to be fought in free-to-play, so he's pretty easy. Level 50 stats should be more than enough to take him on. For mechanics, he attacks both melee and range, and he also has a slam special attack which can knock you back. You can either face tank him, which I do personally, or lower level players might have have a better time freezing him in place with magic and then killing him that way. Bryophyta is the more difficult of the two free-to-play bosses, and honestly, I personally hate this boss. It's super annoying for what it is, and it's totally not worth killing. First off, she can poison you, and she does this special attack where she summons these 3 dudes who you have to kill with an axe or your magic secateurs, and if you attack her too quickly after you kill them, she just immediately summons 3 more. Newer or lower level players are going to want to protect from magic and then either range her at a distance so she can't melee you, or use magic. If you are going to use magic, use fire spells because she does have a 50% weakness to them. The loot mechanics are the same as Obor. You get terrible normal loot with the old loot that you used to get from the boss in a chest that you can open with the mossy keys. The main draw here is the Bryophyta's essence, which is currently sitting at a whopping 10 million GP. Hey guys, how about you hit that like and subscribe for me? The Amoxyotl, which I think is actually how you say the name of the boss, came to us with one of these various Varlamore releases. This boss is specifically designed in a way to help newer and lower level players learn to deal with mechanics that they're going to encounter with more advanced content later on. This is the first one of the bosses that we're talking about that actually really fits in with our ladder metaphor that this entire video is based around. It's more mechanically difficult than any of the other bosses in this tier so far, but the mistakes are not punished nearly as harshly, so you can easily recover and keep going on with the fight. The boss has 3 different attacks. There is the basic attack. It's a magic attack that makes spikes spawn under the player. You have to protect from magic and just move out of the way of the spikes. Pretty easy to deal with. Then she has 2 special attacks. The first one, she's going to shoot ice blocks out at you. Melee attacks are able to one-tick these. Super easy to deal with. If you don't kill them in time, the boss is going to be healed and there's just going to be a ton of these pools on the ground that you can't step on. The second special attack disables your prayer and shoots an icicle at you. All you got to do is turn back on your protect from magic to null all of the damage. You know, after filming and making this section, this boss might belong in the tier 2. It's really somewhere in between the two. Scurious, the king of the rats. It's a super similar concept to the Amoxyotl. This boss is meant to teach you the mechanics that are going to be useful later, but in an unpunishing environment to allow you to learn from them and recover from mistakes. Not only will Scurious teach you how to move to avoid his falling rock special, but you're also going to learn to change your prayers to react to his different basic attacks. The second great thing about Scurious is that he gives a lot more experience than normal monsters at this lower level. His ratbane weapons or ratbone weapons require 50 in their respective stats to wield, but add 10 full damage to your max hit. This extra damage at lower levels equates to way more experience per hour than you would normally be getting. You got to realize that at these lower levels, you're probably only having a max hit of 10 anyways, so this is massive. Scurious is probably a better example than the Amoxyotl as a ladder monster to bridge the gap between the early game and the start of the mid-game monsters. Tier 2 is kind of weird. You're going to see what I mean by that in just a second. They don't really belong anywhere else, and they don't really belong here either. Anyways, here's the Kraken. The Kraken has an 87 Slayer requirement, and that's really the only reason he's not in Tier 1, even though he probably should be anyways. This boss involves a very difficult mechanic of throwing a fishing explosive into this whirlpool and then just hitting him with magic. Prayer doesn't matter here. You just eat when you get hit and then just keep killing the boss some more. Despite my negative tone, I actually really like Kraken. I think it's a good boss. It's just not a like sitting at the computer boss. It's a on mobile while doing something else boss. I'm gonna put both of the archaeologists into the same section because they really don't deserve their own. Then also they're kind of just the same boss anyways in different settings. The crazed archaeologist guards the ruins that are north of the West Green Dragons that you used to PK at back in grade school. And then the deranged archaeologist is located in the swamp to the south of Fossil Island. Both of them attack you by throwing books at you, which can be prayed against with protect from range, and then they will also melee you if you get within melee distance. You also both have a special where they will shout some shit and then just throw some more books at you, which explode this time. Make sure to move out of the way. Neither of them have the best drops in the world, but a lot of early game Iron Men go to the crazed archaeologist in the wilderness as he has a common rune crossbow drop, and it's just super accessible at very low levels. Let's just bang out all the wilderness demi-bosses in a row here. Scorpia, deep wilderness, in multi, pretty much 0 chance of survival if a team comes. The boss itself provides an alright amount of GP per hour, nothing to write home about, but ultimately it's really not worth the risk unless you want the pet. The boss attacks with melee, it poisons you for big numbies, and will spawn 2 healers at half health. The easiest way to kill the boss is to freeze her in place and then mage her from a distance. Then you can freeze the 2 healers and then lure her away once she's unfrozen. If you come here in a duo, you can just ignore the healers and brute force it pretty easily. Overall, it's a fun boss for a pet hunt, but nothing else here really to talk about. Chaos Fanatic is going to be our last wilderness demi-boss. He's just a goofy guy up in the wilderness talking to himself, throwing out these green little blobs and stuff, there's not really a ton of good reason to come up here and kill him. He does drop the Chaos Elemental pet, but it's so much rarer than just getting it off the Chaos Ellie, I wouldn't really recommend this. This fight absolutely sucks if you don't have a Webweaver bow. I actually had to refilm this entire section because I was doing it with a blowpipe and just hating super hard on this boss, but then I switched over to the Webweaver and it absolutely slaps. This boss still doesn't have a ton of reason to come here, and mechanic-wise, he's basically just a crazy archaeologist, but you range him instead of mage. The Deep Wilderness poses an additional threat, but realistically, you're in singles, so it shouldn't be too hard to get away. The King Black Dragon is a classic. I think he's actually the first boss they ever added to RuneScape. Somebody correct me in the comments if I'm wrong about that one. Like many of the older bosses though, he does hit like a truck and is very tanky. He's designed to be fought by a team of players, I'm guessing around like level 90 or so. It was just a different mindset back then. Every boss they released was meant to be fought as a team. People haven't really switched over at this point into solo bossing yet, which leads this to being another one of those bosses where he's pretty much only killed by pet hunters, and for good reason, because this guy is super dope. Nowadays though, just at this level of your account, you can make a lot more money killing something else. Dragon Fire Protection is a must here, and he has a chance to freeze you and poison you, so make sure that you bring your anti-poisons. Drop-wise, he has a few drops that are shared on other monsters' drop tables, like the Draconic Visage and the Dragon Pickaxe, but really, you should only be coming here if you're going after the pet. The Hespori. And yeah, I know I said no skilling bosses, but this one you fight exclusively with combat, so you're gonna have to deal with it. Basically, you plant a Hespori seed, and like a day or so later, the boss will grow. The fight itself, super short, but really fast-paced. I actually love just trying to speedrun this one. You have to utilize two different attack styles, both range and melee, over the course of 3 different phases. Killing the boss awards a bunch of farming experience, a pretty good chance of the pet, and some farming equipment. Killing Skotizo is kind of like a reward from doing Slayer in the Catacombs of Current. Monsters there have a rare chance to drop 1/3 of a totem, and you're able to combine these to make a key in order to fight Skotizo. Skotizo's drop table is pretty stacked with just some standard loot that you can sell for a good amount of money. It also has a jar and a pet, which are the main draws for people fighting him. The fight itself is actually a bit more complicated than some of the other ones in this tier. He's gonna attack you with melee and magic if you're in melee distance, and then he'll just mage you if not. Demon Bane weapons are very strong against him, as he counts as both a black demon and a Grey Deer demon, which you can also fight on those tasks. Throughout the fight, he's gonna summon these altars, which provide him with protection in the form of damage reduction. The Arclight and Emberlight can one-hit these altars to get rid of the damage reduction effect, which I strongly recommend doing if your DPS is low and you can't kill him before they spawn. He also summons some little demons and an Anku, but you can just ignore these entirely. The Mimic is a gimmick. That's all I got. The Thermonuclear Smoke Devil is a Slayer boss that you get access to at level 93 Slayer, and while the requirement is the steepest for any boss in this tier, if we're ranking bosses on difficulty, he doesn't really have what it takes to be in the next tier. The boss shoots you with a very rapid, magic-based range attack, and while this might seem like an oxymoron, what I mean is that you cannot pray against the attacks, but magic protection gear will make him much more likely to splash on you. This attack only has a max hit of 8, so while you're not at risk of dying or getting KO'd at any point, he can rack up some serious damage on you over time. Thermi has several signature drops, including the Smoke Battle Staff, the Occult Necklace, and the pet for which most people kill him for. Tier 3, I would put these kind of in line with the hard combat achievements. What I chose for these bosses are encounters where the boss might actually kill you this time. There's elevated risk, or encounters where you have to use multiple attack styles, but these are still bosses that you should be able to kill with a mid-game account for the most part. The Chaos Elemental, the most annoying boss in the game. When they were designing this, they were just trying to make it as chaotic as possible, which back in 2007 when it came out meant unequipping all of your gear and teleporting you around. Sick mechanics, Jagex, love this shit. Anyways, the boss is kind of in the middle as far as difficulty. He's in Deep Wilderness, he's in multi-combat, so it's pretty hard to escape, and he just hits constant 20s and 30s despite you thinking that you're praying correctly. He's also really tanky, surprise surprise, like every other old boss that we have in the game. They just upped his defense all the way through the roof. Webweaver Bow cuts through it pretty good though. With the constant damage combined with having to keep your inventory full of stuff to avoid him unequipping your weapon, he definitely earns his place in this third tier. If there was a monster that sums up this lower middle tier best, it might be Sarachnis. Sarachnis attacks you with both a melee attack while in melee distance and then a ranged attack when not in melee distance. He has a web attack which freezes you in place, which in turn forces you to change your prayers to avoid taking damage. These hits, while annoying and will likely cause you to go through more food, are realistically not going to kill you. Twice during the fight he's going to spawn some minions which will also hit you with different attack styles, forcing the player to either kill them or keep damaging the boss to finish the kill. The fight itself is engaging but not overly difficult, but the most important thing here is that it brings yet another spider pet into the game, which we all know and love. Next, let's talk about the 3 wilderness bosses, because they probably all belong in this tier. I'm not going to include the little baby version of each one of them. Basically, it's the same boss, it's just dumbed down a little bit. Vedion is the easiest of the 3 and has the lowest gear requirements to actually do the boss well. Mechanically, he forces the player to move away every hit as he spawns these little spots on the floor, which will then pop and damage you if you're next to one of them. This one is a really good mechanic because it rewards good gameplay and allows the player to take literally 0 damage throughout the fight if you're playing optimally, but on the flip side of that, it's not really overly punishing. If you mess up a few times, it's really not that big of a deal. At the halfway point, he will summon some hellhounds, which you have to kill because you can't damage him until both of them are dead, which is really just more annoying than anything. And then, once Vedion is defeated, he's going to spawn his second phase, which is basically the same exact thing, but it's better this time because he's orange now. While this boss isn't overly challenging, the reason that I put this in tier 3 is that 1, it's in middle to deep wilderness, it's in multi-combat, there's step backs, there's multiple phases, there's minions, so I think it belongs here. This is one of the first bosses in the video that we're talking about where you can actually make some serious money. The wiki shows this coming in at nearly 5 million GP per hour. While he does have some uniques, it looks like most of this is pretty evenly carried amongst a ton of the common loot. Callisto, he's a big bear that terrorizes this one little cave in the deep wilderness. Like our other wilderness bosses, he's in multi above 30, so you're not going to be able to tally out if 30 Venezuelans jump in and run through your shit. For his attacks, he do the melee attack because he's a bear, and this one is really gonna mess you up, so realistically what you want to do is freeze him and then either mage or range him from a distance. He comes equipped though. Even though he's a bear, he's somehow able to range you from a distance. Every once in a while, he's gonna shoot out a magic attack as well, which you then will have to pray against. If you do not get your prayer up in time, you're gonna be knocked back and hit for like 50 damage. He's probably my favorite wildy boss to do with friends because he's the only one of these 3 where having more people doesn't actually make the fight worse in some way. Make sure that you watch out though, he is the wildy boss that has the highest potential to stack you out. And that leaves us with Venenatis. I think Venenatis is the hardest wildy boss. She spawns these minions that you have to take care of. I use darts, but she just keeps on respawning these guys. She melees, ranges, and mages you, so you have to keep track of that. And what's really difficult here is that she has this completely debilitating web attack. Getting stuck in this web will do rapid damage and just absolutely decimates your run energy, which then in turn makes dealing with her other attacks much more difficult. Not to mention all of the PKers. And PKers there are. I feel like Venenatis has by far and away the most PKers running through it. I find it really rare for me to even get more than 2 kills before getting ambushed by an entire team. Next, let's head over to a super classic location, Taverley Dungeon. I remember way back in the day getting off school and just killing blue dragons here, but also not having 70 agility to use the pipe shortcut, so I'd have to run all the way around. Good times. Luckily, we can just buy Keymaster teleports now and go straight to our next boss, Cerberus. Cerberus is based off of the 3-headed hound of Hades from Greek mythology named Cerberus. Cerberus comes in on the lower end of the middle of our bosses. The fight's pretty simple, either range or melee him. Demonbane absolutely rips here, as does Scythe and T-Bow. He attacks with all 3 attack styles, but to be honest, you can kind of just ignore this and pray whatever your gear is weakest to. He does have 2 special attacks that you have to watch out for. The first of which, he will spawn these little lava spots under you, just move out of the way to avoid taking damage, and then the more dangerous of the 2, he has this ghost special attack. He's going to summon 3 ghosts, each one attacks you with a different attack style. Praying correctly costs you prayer points. There's a few ways to make it less prayer points, and then praying incorrectly costs you 30 health. Overall, Cerberus is in the very middle of the road as far as difficulty goes, and he prints a very middle of the road amount of money. To be perfectly transparent with you guys, I cannot stand this boss. But on the flip side of that, they did recently change the boss, and a lot of the changes seem to sound pretty good on paper. I was gonna try to get a task and do it for you here. I tutorial skipped for about an hour and a half, and I'm sick of killing cave crawlers, so we're gonna film somebody else. For the actual boss fight, he starts off as a sleepy boy, and you have to wake him up by stunning him and shooting him with Shadow Barrage. Once awake, you have to kill his respiratory system. There's 4 of these, and this just adds an annoying amount of time to each kill, even though now you can one-hit them with Demonbane weapons. This is actually my biggest and, to be honest with you, only gripe with this boss. This just adds a bunch of time to each kill. It's annoying, tedious, and I just don't like it. Other than that, the boss has several different phases that force you to move around to avoid damage while keeping your damage damage up to avoid being overrun. That's kind of like the general theme of this boss. And I know I was hating on it earlier, but it's a nice little boss fight. It's challenging enough to be interesting, but not too intense for lower level players. Next, we have one of our very last legacy bosses, the Corporeal Beast. This boss is probably the best example of the giant boss meant to be fought by like 50 people at a time, and that's still one of the most popular ways to take him down. I love a good court mass. Everyone grab their spears and come hunt down the big beast. He's kind of just like that archetype. There really isn't a whole lot to the fight, but he's still this far up on the list because his attacks are so punishing. He can hit well into the 40s through prayers, and couple that with having to dodge his core, it can quickly get out of hand if you're not prepared for it. While he is pretty low on this list as far as team bosses go, solo kills would definitely be in the next tier up, just since you have to deal with so much extra incoming damage. And since we're slamming out some oldies, let's do a good one this time. The Dagannoth Kings. This is just another one of those that I am super nostalgic for. The Dagannoth Kings are a good step up from the other bosses in this tier due to you having to fight 3 of them sometimes at the same time. You have to bring all 3 attack styles and change your prayers depending on what's currently attacking you. There's a bunch of these little spin lop dudes in the arena as well. They're gonna whittle down your HP while you're dealing with everything else at the same time, and they poison you. If you get multiple Dagannoth Kings on you, it can cause some extra challenges as well, because you're gonna have to either off-tick them and alternate your prayers, or just face tank it and DPS them down as fast as possible. Things can get really hairy here, especially if your DPS isn't high enough. The changing of the prayers, the changing of the gear, along with resource management, these are all going to be key skills in order to get ready for those next pieces of content. The Royal Titans are one of our newer additions, and specifically it is meant to be fought in a duo. You can fight it solo, as you're seeing in these clips that I'm playing here, but it's really not ideal. It's kind of a shit way to do it. I would not come here without a partner. Mechanics wise, this would be in the next tier, but it's not really that punishing, and nothing you do really has to be that precise. The fight starts off with the giants walking away from the platform, so you have to range them. There's minions they spawn, there's some walls that they shoot out, so you have to move around, and eventually they're going to come back to the platform so you can melee them. After you lower one, their health's low enough, they will both permanently take a spot on either side of the arena and continue their attacks while adding a stomp attack where you have to stand on this specific tile with this little glowy thing on it. Overall, it's really not that challenging of a fight, but it's extremely fast-paced and engaging. It's super fun as a duo. Definitely give it a shot. Moons is going to be the last of our standard bosses in this tier, and by far the most complex. The Perilous Moons consist of 3 different bosses. You have to kill all 3 and then loot your chest for your rewards. Each one of these bosses comes with its own set of challenges and mechanics. The Eclipse Moon makes the player focus on movement while hiding behind the ball and reaction time to hit this special phase that I don't know what to call. And of course, a common theme for all of these Moons bosses, keeping up your DPS in order to finish the fight faster. The Blue Moon makes you focus on pathing to avoid the tornadoes and timing to one-tick the ice pile thingies. And then the Blood Moon has a similar skill set needed as the Blue Moon. They make you focus on hitting the jaguars correctly, stepping off at the right times, and then also avoiding the Blood Rain. Overall, this is a great stepping stone up to our next tier, but first, we have our final test. Meet TikTok Jed in the Fight Caves. This is a wave-based challenge that consists of 63 waves of enemies. Not trying to overcomplicate this, but basically every single wave, you add 1 more bat, and if there are 2 enemies on the lowest tier of enemies, instead of spawning that bat, they will spawn in as the next enemy in a chain of monsters, finally ending with the TikTok Jed. Overall, this challenge is a large test of pathing, planning, and resource management, learning how to trap monsters behind other monsters in order to safe spot them, and learning which monsters to prioritize is a must. Once you progress further and get more adept at this, it's going to involve more planning on how to more quickly dispatch your enemies. Getting to Jed himself is relatively simple. Just kill all of the monsters while keeping your HP above 1, and then our big dumb frog will spawn in. Jed attacks with all 3 attack styles, but basically just 2 because you're going to be ranging him at half health. He's going to spawn healers. These healers, they're going to have to be tagged and either tanked, or if you're lower level or a pure or something, you're going to have to kill them because you're not going to be able to tank them long enough to get the kill. Realistically, you have an eon between his attacks, so the boss in a vacuum is actually very simple. However, there is a ton of pressure on this moment, and once those healers spawn in is when people's Jed hands spawn in. The only reason anybody actually fails at killing Jed is their nerves. But you gotta do it. It's a huge moment. It's just like so iconic. Nothing feels better than getting your first fire cape, and with that being said, welcome to tier 4. Let's start this tier off with the Calphite Queen, since she's kind of our last legacy boss here, and she doesn't really fit in with anything else in this tier, or any of the other tiers, really. The Calphite Queen has all the hallmarks of all those old bosses that we were talking about earlier. She's tanky as hell, but this time also with protection prayers. Oh, and instead of making mechanics that involve player skill on any level, they just have one thing going on here, which is unavoidable damage that is 100% accurate. Because of this, you just take an obscene amount of damage for literally no reason. It's just constant. Managing this is why it made it into tier 4. You can use one attack style, but for most players, bringing 2 is going to be better, and then you can further extend your trips by going under the boss to make sure that your hits link up 1-to-1. The main draws for this boss are the pet, which is one of my personal favorites, and then also her head for the Desert Elite Diaries. Next, we have our God Wars dungeon bosses. I think Bandas is going to be our easiest one. Traditionally, you would have either a DPS or a tank role, and then you just go up there with a couple of your boys and just camp them for hours on end. Nowadays, though, he is almost exclusively killed solo. The range solo methods require you to have very precise timing and movement. The idea is that you hit the boss while running from tile to tile to make sure that you are always out of range of his attacks while you can still hit him. So this way, you just have to pray range and damage him from a distance and not getting hit with his very scary melee attack. Making mistakes or losing ticks here can be a recipe for disaster if you're unlucky enough to get smacked by this. Or if you got the money, you can just freeze him and hit him with your shadow. Super duper easy. So Zami's kind of in a weird spot. If you don't have a Scorching Bow, you're going to be stuck doing the old school method where you have to use a red X mechanic and go through this whole hit cycle, kind of like you did at Bandos. However, if you do have the Scorching Bow, this is by far and away the easiest one. You just freeze him in place with the special attack and then just start blasting. The special attack only costs 25%, so you have 4 hits, which is well more than enough to kill him. I just did like 4 or 5 kills here, and I didn't even get past 2 specials, so even if you're eating shit, not hitting very well, you should have more than enough time to DPS him down. Commander Zilliana, very similar to the other bosses. They all basically have the same concept. You hit the boss while not getting hit by the boss. I think her tiles are slightly more difficult to hit, and more advanced methods involve walking on certain tiles and running on other tiles, which gives it a slight bit more depth than Bandos or Zami. Other than that, it's about the same level of difficulty. Hitting the boss is good, and not getting hit by the boss is also good. And then finally, we have Kriara, or Armadillo. I think Kree is the most difficult of the 4 bosses, and my least favorite, personally. Also, I've just never been lucky here. This boss gives me nothing, and I resent the hell out of that. You got a few different options for what to do to kill the boss here. You can just range her with a crossbow and phase tank. This sucks. I don't recommend this. You could also major with a shadow, which causes you to take a shitload of extra damage, but it's probably the best method. It's just a ton of damage. Or you can utilize Chinchampas to bounce damage off the melee minion. I think this is technically the fastest, but it's super expensive because chins just cost a shitload. This is also the most difficult because it requires you to target the boss in between hits before refocusing your chins on the melee minion. If you just chin the boss, it's not going to work because she has a ton of defense and you're just never going to hit. It takes some precise timing to get down, and it might be a bit difficult, which is why I ranked Kree as our most difficult God Wars dungeon boss. The Huey Codal is a multi-phase multiplayer boss that was released with one of the various Varlamore updates. The boss has multiple distinct phases, which is going to be a trend for most of the bosses from here on out. Due to there being multiple distinct phases, you have to learn to deal with different things, which ultimately makes the fight more complex. In the first phase, you have to move to avoid these dude, I don't know, floor spots? I don't know what to call these. Pray against the incoming projectiles while defeating these pieces of his tail, and then comes the actual fight. The boss is meant to be fought as a trio, with each player having to pray a specific protection prayer. You can choose to tank the incoming projectiles or flick your prayers. Praying correctly will often cost your team DPS, so it's always a bit of a trade-off. After doing enough damage, you're gonna have to avoid some shockwaves, kill his tails before finishing off the boss. This whole fight is a good stress test for movement and prayer switches, all while maintaining DPS. We have 3 Slayer bosses in this tier, the first and easiest of which is the Grotesque Guardians, which is the boss version of the Gargoyle. Like in our last section, this boss has distinct different phases, all with different mechanics that you have to deal with. Phase 1 is basically just a tank and spank scenario. You can utilize staying under the melee guy to mitigate some of the damage, but other than that, this isn't really rocket science. Phase 2 involves some timing when stepping away, and ideally hitting some big numbies with your Chally. The third phase has some blue orbs that have to be tagged, or they heal the boss bigfully, and then the final phase is back to a tank and spank. Unfortunately, there's no real reason to fight this boss outside of pet hunting or clogging, but maybe someday they'll make these granite dust tradable, so this will all be worthwhile. The Alchemical Hydra has our highest Slayer level requirement, coming in at 95. The fight itself has 4 different phases with a large overarching theme of movement, as you're gonna have to move the boss around to be able to effectively damage him, all while keeping track of his attacks to make sure that you're praying correctly. Incorrect prayers, especially late into the fight, can be devastating. To damage the boss effectively, he must be dragged onto these big fountain vent things, things. Each phase means that you gotta move on to the next event. The first phase has this poison attack that can be easily moved out of the way of. Phase 2 has lightning that you need to avoid, and then phase 3 has a fire attack that you have to be wary of. With precise movement, you're able to skip this entire thing. I'm not sure if that's intended or if this is a glitch. Then finally, phase 4 is kind of like an enrage phase that alternates attack styles and deals damage in the 50s if you miss a prayer. Overall, a super engaging fight with a rewarding loot table to match. Araxor is our final Slayer boss, and in my opinion, the most difficult. And while the attacks might not hit as high as the Hydra's attacks, there's a lot more going on here that you have to keep track of, which leads itself to a more difficult fight overall. The boss spawns 3 different types of minions that you have to deal with. They all have their different mechanics and ways to deal with them, or ignoring them entirely while taking more damage. Depending on which minion is first, you're also going to have to deal with a different special attack. Most of these deal with timing and movement. Then the boss has a final enrage phase that requires precise timing to move out of the way of his slam attack. The attack doesn't hit you that hard, but it is constant and can be difficult to recover from. Yeah, so after doing a bunch of Araxor for this video, I think the Hydra is more difficult and there's more to keep track of, more going on, etc. I would actually switch the 2 of those in this order. Next up, we have our 3 quintessential mid-game moneymakers. First off, Vorkath. This guy makes every single money-making list that I make. Not because I like the boss, admittedly, I actually don't like this boss very much, but he does print constant GP that does not rely on RNG. But this video isn't about making gold, it's about ranking bosses in difficulty, and Vorkath can actually be quite challenging when getting your first few KC, mainly due to this acid spitting special. Well, apparently it's not acid. According to the wiki, it's Dragonfire. I'm not sure how accurate that is, but it doesn't really matter. This can hit you from between 25 to 41 damage every single game tick. Needless to say, this can pretty immediately delete you if you're not ready for it. You gotta make sure that you are ready to start moving the second that he starts shooting, or you're a dead man. New players can just walk back and forth, but for maximum DPS, you're gonna wanna Wooks walk this phase, which means that you're just hitting him and moving out of the way of each acid tick every single tick. Other than this, the fight is actually super simple. Pray, use Dragonfire and Venom protection. Then make sure that you kill the facehuggers from the hit movie Alien with your Crumble Undead spell. Boys, lock in, it's Grumbling time. The Grumbler is a mid-game boss that is designed specifically as a way to make my bingo team quit RuneScape. The boss really is quite difficult at first. It has 2 different phases. The range phase, which is super chill. You basically just pray and shoot, just start blasting them. And then the melee phase, which you can make super chill by just freezing them. There's some spikes on the ground that you have to dodge from time to time, and there's some spikes that just follow you around. It's super duper annoying. The coolest part of the fight is that he gets the zoomies, and you gotta dodge all these little guys on the ground here while you're blasting away at them. And then finally, he does the shield thing that you can skip if you're good and lucky. You gotta have both things going on for you. If you're not, you have to drain the shield before finally finishing the kill. So if my little section there on the Muspa seemed rushed, it's because it was like 1 a.m. when I finished that. I had to get up in 5 hours for work, but also our next boss is, in my opinion, the most important and influential boss in this entire video. I could probably make an entire video about the impacts of Zulrah on the current state of old school RuneScape, and I wouldn't be glazing it so hard if I couldn't tie it back into the concept for this video. Quick history lesson here. Zulrah was released in January of 2015. This was RuneScape's first homegrown boss, and for reference of how early this was, the Grand Exchange didn't come out until over a month later. Before this, we had the legacy bosses that we've been talking about earlier. Big, bulky, point and click, tanky as fuck, deals a ton of damage for absolutely no reason, but the way that you fought them was just tank and spank. Click the boss, click food, repeat. Zulrah is different. Zulrah is really, really different. Our hardest boss before Zulrah was the Godwars dungeon, and the level of difficulty between them and Zulrah is the size of the Grand Canyon. You have to make sure that you attack with the right attack style, from the right set of tiles at the right place at the right time, all while healing, dealing with snakelings, venom, and Zulrah's constant range 40s during the mage phase. We had nothing even close to this before, but this was going to go on to set the tone for all of the content that was going to come after Zulrah. Point and click at this point is officially dead. Zulrah does a fantastic job of teaching you how to switch your gear to attack the boss's weaknesses, movement in order to position yourself to avoid incoming damage, and just generally to be able to react and adapt to an ever-changing situation, or eventually just memorize it. All these skills are going to be super important for pretty much every piece of content in our next 2 tiers, and Zulrah is one of the best training simulators to get yourself ready for them. Alright guys, it's a new day, it's a new tier, and in this tier I did something that I didn't do in the other tiers. I actually tried to rank these throughout the tier in order of difficulty. I joined a Discord call with like 20 to 30 people in it, I had them look at it and they all shouted over each other. Nobody could agree on anything, so we know that this is correct. First to join the party is Duke Succulus. He comes from the Desert Treasure 2 quest, and in my opinion, he's the easiest of the bosses from this quest. The first part of the fight is brains off. You just make potions so that you can wake him up, and then the remainder of the fight, you have to melee him while stepping away to avoid his attacks. This requires some timing, but it's not tick perfect or anything. It's actually super chill. There's this big glowy eye attack that can one hit you if you don't hide behind the pillar, so you just move behind the pillar, and then there's this vent attack which makes you go to the other side. Well, there's a lot going on, and you have to move around a lot. This one isn't really as hard as the other DT2 bosses, and there's nothing that can really kill you here. If shit gets a little bit too real, you can just hide behind one of the pillars and chomp your way through it until you're ready to DPS again. I'm hesitant to put the Nightmare of Ashihama even in this tier since you can kill it in a mass, but I do think it belongs here because the most difficult mechanic here is finding another living person who's willing to kill this with you. There is always the mass world, or you could solo it, but soloing regular Nightmare is absolutely dreadful. The boss mechanics mainly involve reacting to the animations, or more realistically, the sounds that the boss makes. The melee sound being absolutely terrifying and making me jump out of my skin every single time. That takes care of all of his auto attacks, and then you have to deal with a set group of special attacks. There's these little minion guys that you have to kill, mushrooms that you have to avoid, parasites that you have to squish, and the Nightmare is also a fan of Naruto running across the arena from time to time. And at the end of all this effort, you're stuck with nothing because the drops are basically impossible to get, so you do 2 kills and then you move on to something that doesn't suck. Okay, back to Desert Treasure 2 bosses, and next up we have the Whisperer. This one can actually be really tough, especially if you don't have great gear. I remember when I first did the quest, this was actually the hardest one for me. This was immediately on release day, so nobody knew what they was doing. There were no guides. It might be different for people now, so take that with a grain of salt. This fight is really unique in that it actually has a bunch of puzzles in the middle of it that you have to solve using this black crystal. There's a light puzzle that you need to step on certain spots on the ground, a puzzle where you have to shoot certain ghosts to get different effects, and then finally this pillar puzzle, which ultimately was my downfall during the Awakened version. More on this one later. The hardest part of the fight though is the Enrage phase. You're teleported into the Shadow Realm, and then the boss will alternate its auto attack at you, all while spawning tentacles that if hit are going to lower your sanity and damage you. If your sanity meter hits 0, it is game over for you. There is no eating out of the damage of this. There's just a ton going on in this phase, and if your gear sucks, if you're low level, or if you're just bad at the game, you're in for a huge DPS check. Before we move on to our final DT2 bosses, I did want to talk about our second newest boss to old school RuneScape, Yama. Just the base version though, don't worry, we're going to be talking about his contracts later on. And remember, for this video, we're just going off on how difficult it is to get a completion, not how difficult it is to pull off one of those math-based nerd shit equations that you see on YouTube. This is another one of those bosses that is a lot more fun in a duo. Solo is fine, it's just also kind of shit. The boss has different auto attacks based on which glyph is located where on the floor, and then we'll have a different special attack which also revolves around those glyphs. Stepping on the right glyph at the right time nulls the corresponding special attack, so positioning and timing is very important here. In between phases, there's this little intermission thing. It's my favorite part of the whole fight. You zoom across this lake of lava where you just go and then you smoke this demon guy. It's a ton of fun. Throughout the fight, fire spawns from either side, so you have to have really good situational awareness, and then this meteor thing in the second phase can fuck you up big time if you're not ready for it. The final phase is a little bit of everything all at once and can really feel like drinking from a fire hose for your first few sends, but staying calm, praying correctly, and dodging his attacks while keeping your DPS up are going to be the keys to effectively finishing him off. Leviathan is, in my opinion, the coolest of the DT2 bosses. I just love the giant sea creature vibe and how the surrounding area here is just awesome. The fight itself can be really difficult or just really easy depending on how you play it. The boss attacks you with his basic attack in these short little spurts of damage. He shoots different types of orbs at you where you have to change your prayers to avoid the incoming damage. After each one of these little spurts, he's going to drop boulders on you, and then the next spurt of attacks is going to be increasingly faster each and every time. If you don't stun the boss, this will eventually be way too much for most players to deal with. Speaking of that stun mechanic, you can stun the boss using shadow spells, which allows you to run around to the back and get a big back shot in. This is a guaranteed 65% plus of your max hit to him. He will then use one of 2 special attacks. There's this boulder attack where you stack the boulders and then hide, and then there's this lightning attack where you can avoid the lightning and hit the boss by running back and forth on these tiles that I have here. And this is why I have the boss ranked so low. If you want to trivialize the fight, I recommend using Red-Eye Jedi's Awakened Leviathan guide and then just is using that one on this normal boss. It's going to be super laid back. All you do is you just chain these stuns back to back and you whittle down the boss's health over time. It's going to be super laid back, but it is going to be a good deal slower than just DPSing through the prayer switching sections. If you want fast, consistent kills, I would just do the prayer switching until it gets a little bit too fast for you. Stun, do the special attack, rinse, repeat. The hardest part of the fight is this enrage phase where you have to chill with this jellyfish guy, shoot the boss while moving and praying correctly. However, you can just double web weaver spec and completely skip this part entirely, but if you actually had to deal with this mechanic in any way, this would be really hard. And then we have our final God Wars dungeon boss, which, to be honest, isn't really like the other ones. Next kind of just lives in the same spot, and the lore probably matches up. I don't actually know. A lot of you are probably thinking Nex is piss easy in a mess. You go in, the kills last about 1 minute tops, and even the worst low-level player could just sit bruised the entire time and make it through. And sure, you are correct. That will get you a KC. But most people kill Nex in a trio to 5-man team, so this ranking is based off of the small teams and not the mass. Nex's true difficulty comes into having to negate and heal large amounts of damage, all while keeping up your DPS. There isn't really a high APM aspect of this boss. It's very point and click compared to everything else in this tier. Nex just does an extraordinary amount of damage to you, and you really have to deal with that. Other than this, there's 5 phases, all with different stuff going on, and there's a minor bit of memorization to that. Overall, it's a very simple fight. It's just very punishing. Vardorvis is our final and most difficult Desert Treasure 2 boss. While this one tends to be the fastest of the bosses, the entire fight is really intense. You have to have tick-perfect timing to dodge through the axes, all while having the spatial awareness to not run into another one. There's spikes on the ground to react to, Vardorvis's head pops up out of the ground to shoot projectiles that you have to pray against, and there's also this little spore puzzle, I guess. Overall, there's just so much going on all at once that this can be extremely overwhelming for your first few sends. And in walks our first raid, the Tombs of a Mascot, RuneScape's newest and most accessible raid. The raid consists of 4 demi-bosses with a puzzle room before each of them, and then a 3-phase final boss. This raid has a unique invocation system that allows you to augment how difficult your experience will be, all while rewarding you for taking on the extra challenge in the way of a better chance of loot at the end. If you're looking to get into endgame content, this is a great place to start. It allows you to start off slow with lower invocations, and then you can start to add them one by one. This is a great way to get better at the raid and better at the game in general. First, let's run through all the bosses really quick. Baba, Big Monkey. This one's all about positioning yourself and thinking ahead to avoid getting hit by the boulders and swept into the gap. The beetle forces you to place dung in locations that are more convenient so that you don't run out of space. Akka focuses on dealing with his memory puzzle and moving around to avoid the incoming cub blobs. And then Zabak has a ton of health and forces you to solve puzzles during the fight. The final challenge has too many mechanics to really spell it out here for you, but mistakes can be very punishing, and then trying to recover from those mistakes can then lead to even more mistakes that will then cause you to wipe the raid. All in all, the raid is a really good introduction to higher level content and should prepare you for the more difficult content that we will be covering in just a second. The Chambers of Xeric was Jagix's first attempt of making a raid, and honestly, they kind of knocked it out of the park. There's so many different rooms to learn and a bunch of different puzzles, and it's just the right amount buggy to be really enjoyable. This raid is fairly accessible in the late stages of the mid-game. You really just need a powered staff, a whip, and a crossbow to get started, and I guess some friends who would be willing to take you with the gear that I just mentioned. Unlike Toa, where solo is the easiest scaled, this raid is going to be easiest in trios up to around 5-mans. Anything with more people or less people is going to be substantially more difficult than this. Most of the rooms are really trivial, except for rooms that start with a V, like Vasa, Vespula, Vanguards. These are all going to be much more difficult, and for your first several raids, I would avoid scouting them. Once you get more comfortable though, these end up being some of the best rooms, except for Vanguards, they can go to hell. Ulm, on the other hand, is a good deal more complicated than these other rooms, and if you don't know what you're doing, this is going to be an absolute train wreck. Kind of like Toa, once things start to go south, it can be really hard to recover and get back on track. The main focus here though is to avoid getting hit at all instead of trying to tank your way through it. I originally had the Corrupted Gauntlet in a higher position, but the Peanut Gallery in my Discord call talked me off the ledge on this one. The Corrupted Gauntlet is kind of like a mini raid. The objective here is to make armors, weapon, food, and potions, and then fight the Hunlith. And despite being a mid-game staple, trapping Iron Men here for literal months on end, this remains one of the most difficult solo pieces of content in the game. First, the prep. You have to very efficiently plan your preparation procedure so as to have enough time to get all of the gear and supplies that you need. And when you're newer, you need more gear and more supplies, and you'll be slower getting everything, which hits you on both ends of this. And then there's our final challenge, the Hunlith. The boss attacks you with mage and range. They're both extremely punishing if you're not praying correctly. The boss also changes its prayer, so you have to change your attack style so you can actually hit him. On top of this, periodically the boss will spawn tornadoes that follow you around. They must be avoided or you will be deleted pretty much instantly, and throughout all of this, the floor is lava. The final part of this fight is extremely overwhelming, but in in the spirit of the theme of this video, the Corrupted Gauntlet is going to get you better at this game like nothing else can, especially with learning how movement works. It's the single best learning experience in the game, hands down, and while it's very tough at first, if you give it enough attempts, you're gonna get it down, and you're gonna be a lot better at the game because of it. Next up, we have Challenge Mode Cox. It's just normal Chambers of Xeric, but more so. What's different here is that you have to do every single room in a row, and all of the enemies have 50% more offensive and defensive stats, and 50% more health. Because of this, Ulm hits like a freight train, and the added defense makes this raid a bit gear and level gated. However, the mechanics aren't any different from normal Cox, and with enough supplies and persistence, you can eventually just complete the raid since there aren't any white mechanics. These are definitely worth doing though, they just shit out purples as long as you have the gear to do them efficiently. And it's finally time to wrap up this tier with the best piece of content that Jagex has ever produced, the Theater of Blood. The best way that I can explain the difficulty of Top is that the floor to get completions really isn't that bad, but the ceiling for as far as you can optimize your experience is really high. But this video isn't about being a peak sweat lord, this is about just barely squeaking your very first completion, and for this you have many hurdles, the first of which is finding people who are willing to go with your 0 KC heaven ass. The reason this is hard is that Tob is team oriented in a way that the other raids just really aren't. There's just so many ways you can rag your team. You could stand in blood at Maiden, fly in bloat, fuck up the maze at Sodatseg, be slow at Nylos, die early at Verzik, and doing any of these is going to make the raid really difficult for a learner team to complete it, and often you're going to wipe the raid in a matter of seconds. The best way to find a team is just to have friends who are willing to take you, but if you don't have friends who know how to Tob, I found that you can find teams in the We Do Raids learner chat really easily. It might just take you a few more minutes than normally. Just make sure that you either join an existing team or make your own team. If you spam shit like LFT learner, any Tobs, anybody taken learners, no one is going to want to go with you. The second difficult part is the raid. In Maiden, freezing the krebs correctly can take a little bit of timing. It's really not that bad though. The biggest way that this room can go to shit is if you let the blood hit you and then just spawn a million tomatoes, so make sure you're avoiding them. Bloat is invincible. He's the hardest boss in the game and endlessly frustrating. You're never ever going to get better at Bloat, and the faster that you come to terms with this, the better. Nylos is the highest skill room in the game, getting really good at killing a ton of crabs really fast, and knowing which Nylo to kill when is going to be the key here. And then Sot is probably both the easiest boss and the easiest to ruin the entire raid during. One slow maze or one misstep during the maze can easily end it for all of you. Zarpus is pretty glue eater, just make sure that you land your specs and then shoot him with your blow PP. And then we have our final boss, Verzik. If we're going off of single bosses, definitely the most complex encounter in the game. There is 3 distinct phases, all of them extremely difficult with a ton of different mechanics. You have to know what to do, where, when, and it's just so much. It's gonna be like drinking from a fire hose for at least your first 10 KC. There's so many different things I could talk about right now, but the video is already 45 minutes long, so let's condense this down. I think that the step backs during the second phase are probably the most difficult part for newer players, and when I run learners, it does tend to become Bounce City. If you're new, just make sure that you're moving correctly while healing, or you're just going to snowball your mistakes and die here. The first few KC, they're going to be an absolute train wreck. That's totally fine, but you're going to become a little bit better each and every raid, and this is going to be the most fun that you'll ever have in the game once you get good at it. Tier 6, the final tier. This one's going to be a little bit goofy. I'm going to do kind of like most of the super endgame challenges. I'm also going to rank the Yama contracts for the Oathblade, just since those are pretty new, and I think people would want to hear about that. But yeah, this has been over a month in the making at this point, so really appreciate you guys sticking by. Vasani's Nightmare is going to be our first boss in this tier, and you might remember the regular Nightmare from our first tier, and this boss is basically the same boss, but tuned through the roof. This boss must be fought solo, so you can't just depend on others to kill the boss for you like you could in the Mass World with the regular Nightmare. Missed prayers will be extremely punishing here with a max hit of 80, but the boss on the flip side of that does reward perfect play, so there's not going to be any chip damage like we saw at the regular Nightmare. All of the Nightmare's special attacks can be used every phase, and the Fasani's combines the floor spot special attack with both the flowers and the mushroom special attacks. At the end of each phase, increasing amount of sleepwalkers will have to be killed. Missing these will do massive damage to the player and likely one hit you. The max hit, if you like miss a bunch of these, is like 151 or something like that. There's no surviving that. And at the end of all of it, Fasani will summon Sleepwalkers to her while you deal the last little bit of damage. They only hit like 15. This serves more of a bit of a DPS check. All in all, Fasani's Nightmare is really difficult due to the mistakes costing you like 60 hit points every single time you mess up, and then the run back to the boss for each attempt after that is just a damn marathon. And in walks our first Yama contract, Forfeit Breath, and this is going to be the easiest of the Yama contracts, but it's still significantly more difficult than the base form of Yama. All of the White Oathblade contracts have a set group of changes which are the fight must be solo, Yama attacks faster, Yama uses special attacks faster, which also then land faster, the shadow and the fire waves come out more often and they hit you a lot harder. The judge guy, he go super duper fast, and then everything in the whole fight just hits way higher. What's unique about Forfeit Breath though is that your run energy is constantly draining. The boss's attacks drain your run energy for the same amount that they hit you for, so like 10 damage equals minus 10 run energy. If you reach 0 run energy, you die. The whole run energy thing really isn't the worst part here, just gotta keep track of it, just drink your stamina pots with that Ring of Endurance equipped. The basic Yama contract mechanics though, they're just really difficult to deal with, they're super punishing, and they turn a relatively chill fight into a true endgame encounter. Next up we have the Coliseum, and to be transparent with you, I wasn't really sure whether to put the Colo or the Inferno as more difficult. The reason for this is that the Coliseum is more intense, but for a much shorter amount of time, where the Inferno is 3 to 4 times longer, but it's less intense overall. So different strokes for different folks. The Coliseum is a wave-based PvM challenge which forces the player to face 12 waves of enemies on the way to beating the final boss, the Soul Heredit. At the end of each wave, you have to pick an invocation, which makes the fight more difficult, and there's a bit of RNG that kind of goes into this. You can just continuously get really shitty invocation, which makes it much more difficult. Overall, things are pretty chill until wave 6, and then things start to get real. Having precise timing and knowing how to solve different combinations of enemies that are stacked behind the pillars is going to be the key to beating the Coliseum. One of the most important things here is going to be recognizing the tick cycles that your enemies are on, and then being able to pray against different attack styles depending on when the enemies are attacking you. It's very difficult and a ton to get used to, but this one is super fun once you get it down. Next up, the Inferno, old school RuneScape's original hardest challenge. I maintain that nothing in this game feels nearly as good as getting your first Inferno cape. Like the Coliseum, the Inferno is a wave-based challenge, but this time it's an absolute marathon. For most first capes, times are going to be around 2 hours long, and while no point of the Inferno is as challenging as most of the other challenges in this tier, most of the late waves can delete you very quickly, and you have to keep this up for a very long time. The waves work the same way as the fight caves. 2 bats equals a blob, 2 blobs equals a melee, and so on and so forth. When you get into the 50s, that's when you get both the mages and the rangers in the same waves, and that starts to get pretty difficult. The whole idea here in the Inferno is that you try to solve the wave. What that means is that you get all of the enemies in a way that you aren't in danger of taking any damage. Usually this means trapping some of them behind the pillar while focusing on others. This can take a lot of experience to get down. You need to move very quickly because everything in here hits very big. After we defeat Dread, we get 3 Jads, and then 3 Jads turns into our final challenge, Tiz Calls Up, which isn't really the hardest part of this because the waves are a bit more difficult in my opinion. The nerves get real here though, because you have 2 hours of caves behind you and 2 hours more in front of you if you mess this one up, so Jade hands usually end the runs here. Overall, this is another one of those experiences that is going to teach you a lot about how to play the game, and you're going to be a lot better by the end of it. The hard mode Theater of Blood is exactly like the Theater of Blood, only more so, and for this one, they really tuned it up. It's significantly more difficult to get completions than the normal theater, and if you went in there with an all 0 KC team, your odds of completion are not great. Since I already covered the theater in depth, let's look at what's different in the hard mode compared to the normal one. First up, Maiden. Blood lasts forever, all crabs spawn every time, Maiden tanks need to be swapped or you're going to take increasingly huge damage, and any blood stepped on or crabs leaked increases Maiden's attack speed and damage. For Bloat, the hands and feet fall the entire time, that's it, and it might not seem like that big of a deal, but this is much harder than it seems. For Nilo's, 3 demi-bosses spawn that you gotta blow up, and then the boss has an interesting mechanic where you have to meet up for mage and then spread out for range, which is actually pretty difficult. For Sodetseg, the maze is split into different pieces with each person only having one portion, and then there's 2 balls instead of 1. Zarpus is actually easier in all ways. There's less room for the Exhume, so you don't have to run around as much. They heal the boss less, the boss has lower defense, and then you can legit AFK the final portion. Verzik, on the other hand, is an absolute menace. For phase 1, all that's different is you have to move side to side to avoid the falling rocks. In phase 2, she poisons the square, so you have to move around, and then in phase 3, crabs do more damage and have to be popped. Yellows have 3 spots each, and the green ball has to be bounced or it's an automatic kill. Purple tornadoes heal triple the amount, and at 5% health, she will gain 30% of her health back. Since the tornado phase is the most difficult part of the fight, having to deal with it for significantly more time is very challenging, especially for new players. The Awaken Whisper is my least favorite and the easiest of the Awaken bosses, and the reason for this is really simple: the Pillar Special. There is 0 chance on this planet that I'm going to be able to memorize 5 whole things. It's just not happening. Other than this, the fight's an absolute slug. All the specials are significantly more difficult, there's more auto attacks, and the biggest threat the entire time is your sanity meter, which is constantly quickly ticking down on you. Next up, we have our second Yama contract, Divine Severance. Aside from all the normal Yama contract shenanigans, this task is all about timing. Protection Purse can only be turned on for 2 ticks at a time, meaning that you have to be fairly precise when praying against Yama's auto attacks. Yama will also spawn additional Void Flares. These are the jellyfish guys continuously throughout the fight, but this time with half health. Despite being one-hittable, this is still just one more thing to deal with during an already extremely difficult fight. If you do allow any jellyfish to pop, you will die immediately. And next up, we have the Doom Amokiotl. This is RuneScape's newest boss as of the time of making this video, and he is extremely challenging, and in my opinion, he's the most difficult standard boss in the game if we're excluding challenges like Awakened and Yama contracts. The first 7 floors aren't too challenging. Floor 7 can get a little bit fast, but floor 8 and beyond crank the difficulty up quite a bit. The Doom's going to launch 2 projectiles overhead that are going to burst on where the player is standing. You're going to have to move while doing 6 tick-perfect prayer switches, all while maintaining DPS on the boss and dealing with all of the other mechanics that are happening at the same time. It's truly an overwhelming amount of stuff to deal with, and the floor itself is going to fill up with acid as you keep on going on, so it keeps on getting harder and harder. Eventually, you will get a breather when the boss turns into a convertible, but you best do enough damage during this phase because homie's going to spawn a bunch of trees afterwards, and it's going to be really hard to follow the orb through all the acid while dodging and praying against the double rock attack. This part is probably not going to be doable for most players, so you're going to want to bank on hitting big numbies during the race car phase. Overall, I think this boss is really fun. It is very difficult to get down, and it definitely earns its spot as one of our most difficult encounters on this list. Awakened Nuke is going to be our next challenge, and this is actually the boss that I am most dreading getting the B-roll for. I did this so long ago, and I don't want to have to relearn this, and while the regular Duke is the easiest of the normal fights, the Awakened version is seriously not to be trifled with. So right off the bat, the boss has 4 times as many hit points, and you can't drain his defense, so by default, this is going to be a slog. And as the fight goes on, new mechanics emerge. It kind of starts off a little bit more simple, and then just ramps up from there. At 75% health, he's going to start doing the gas attack, but instead of 1 or 2, like from the normal Duke, it's 4 this time, so you actually have to run back and utilize some of the back vents as well. At 32% health, there's going to be a black ball that goes side to side. You should avoid this one, but it's not like #1 priority or anything. All throughout the fight, Duke can cover you in poison that you have to walk out like you're an Ulm. This is especially hard because you have to make sure that you're walking this out while not getting maged, not getting meleeed, all while avoiding all of the other things that are going on. Yeah, did not get a completion. This shit is still really, really hard. Best of luck to you. Let's go. RuneScape's top 5 hardest bosses starts with the Contract of Glyphic Attenuation. And I'm going to be honest with you all, I cheesed this. When it first came out, you could just use Ruby Bolts, and over the course of like 20 minutes, you would trivialize the fight and ignore all of the actual mechanics, but now they fixed it, and you have to do it legit. On top of the normal contract changes, Yama gets a shitload more health, and basically you have to use Crush since his other defenses are so huge. Glyphs hurt you for 3 times more than normal, and they only protect you for 1/3 of the amount of time. You have 3 ticks to hit them with all of the special projectiles and all that. And then also your damage dealt increases with higher prayer bonus, but your prayer also drains faster instead of slower. And for number 4, we have the Awakened Leviathan. I think this one is the second hardest Awakened fight. Some people had a harder time with the Leviathan than Vard. I had a much harder time with Vardorvis. It's really just different strokes for different folks. The vast majority of the Awakened Leviathan is a set cycle. Stun the boss, deal with the special, rinse and repeat. Because of this, the whole fight feels really smooth and rhythmic, which is why it is my favorite Awakened fight. With the exclusion of the Enrage phase, nothing here is really overly difficult. That being said, the Enrage phase is pretty nuclear. The Leviathan's projectiles come out 1 per game tick and deal massive damage if you don't pray correctly. You have to move within the jellyfish the entire time, all while hitting all of the prayers, and the boss is continuously dropping boulders on your head that make your pathing all types of messed up. If this part lasted longer, this would easily be the hardest fight in the game. However, it is short enough that you can end up just getting lucky. Awakened Vardorvis is the most difficult of the Awakened fights, and after having just sent a bunch of all of the Awakened bosses for this video, I did want to make a quick comment. First things first, I went into all these pretty raw. I haven't touched these since I got Blorva, and they're extremely difficult. I do want to take back the point that I made in the Awakened Leviathan section about the part before Enrage being pretty easy. It is not. I planked like 3 times in a row before getting to Enrage on the first time. Yeah, super duper hard. Vardorvis himself, it seems impossible. I don't know how I ever got it clear in the first place. This shit's nuts. Well, anyways, for Awakened Vard, there's several key differences. First, the axes damage you on spawn, so you can't just chill in a corner like the normal Vardorvis. Secondly, they hit you for massive damage. I think somewhere in the 80s. I'm not going to test this one out for you. Avoiding the axes, though, is the single most important thing during the fight. The Spore Puzzle is much faster, Vard himself hits much harder, and the heads can now shoot you with both range and magic. I actually started giggling the first time that I saw the enrage phase here just because of how impossible it is. The entire time, you're dodging the axes, you're damaging the boss, you're dealing with the spikes, but his heads are spamming you with magic and range balls just back to back, often forcing you to move and change prayers on the same tick. It's actually impossible. I don't know how I ever got a completion here. And for our number 2 spot, we have the Contract of Sensory Clouding, and I am very glad that I actually recorded my completion of this. I don't want to have to gear up and just do this one all over again. It is literally impossible. This fight's all about the final phase, but let's talk about the actual mechanics here. Yama's always going to try to melee you. So basically, in the normal fight, you can just mage him and he's going to stay at a distance, but in this one, he's always going to close that gap. In the first 2 phases, not a big deal, just pray correctly, but in the final phase, whenever Yama melees you, this is going to spawn a Void Flare, which makes this part extremely difficult. To make this part even more fun, your weapon's ranges are cut in half, all of Yama's attacks do more chip damage, and if you let a Void Flare pop, you automatically die. Now, all of this comes together for a hellish final phase where you have to deal with all the normal Yama contract bullshit, which is nearly impossible on its own, but you also have to continuously manage Yama's spacing. The way you do this is by using the Scorching Bow special attack to bind him in place. To do this effectively, you have to also maintain your special attack energy, otherwise you're gonna run out. It's just beyond overwhelming, and if this doesn't seem that difficult to you just because it's like kind of one hard mechanic, give it a shot. I bet you change your mind pretty quick here. And now for old school RuneScape's hardest challenge, the Bloodied Blows contract. Now there was a lot of debate among my friends over whether the Sensory Clouding or the Bloodied Blows is more difficult, and if you're always perfect with everything all the time, every single time, this one should be fine for you. However, one single mistake at any point during this fight ends your run every single time. In this fight, Yama has a whopping 3000 HP. To counteract this, there's an effect where your minimum hit is increased the lower your HP is. However, this effect also applies to Yama. This is another one where the whole challenge is just the final phase. During the whole fight, you hit insane numbers due to the guaranteed minimum effect, but in the final phase, you have to strike a balance with your HP. You have to have low enough HP for you to one-hit all the Void Flares, but also high enough HP to not get killed by chip damage. Remember, Yama hits higher the longer the fight goes on, so by the end, you basically have to heal up and then lower your HP for the Void Flares, and then also heal back up to not get one hit by Yama. All of this while dealing with all of the insane contract mechanics, and not to mention, any single mistake during this final phase is a guaranteed wipe because you're sitting at like 10 HP. Woo! Well, that's over with. An hour video. Thank you guys so much for sticking around, for the few of you who made it this far. And if you're not already subscribed, you might as well. You just watched an hour of me yapping. Anyways, super grateful that I'm able to do this whole YouTube thing. Wouldn't be possible without you guys. So thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one.